right, hello everybody. My name is Dr. Clem Bastow. I'm going to be a host for today. I'd also just like to acknowledge that we're meeting on unceded Wurundjeri land and pay my respects and note that sovereignty is today we're going to be talking all about AI and representations of AI in screen media and how that's shaped our understanding of AI. I can see James ready to jump in and define what that is, but I'll introduce us all first. So next to me is Kat Sparks, who's a multi-award winning Australian author, editor and artist with a PhD examining the intersection between eco-catastrophe science fiction and contemporary climate fiction. And some of her career highlights include fiction editor for Cosmos magazine, SF festival director, science fiction as a lens into future war seminar at the Centre for Defence Research ADC panellist, archaeological dig photographer in Jordan, and studying with Margaret Atwood in Florida, amongst just a few other things. And she's also published over 90 short stories and 3 collections, including The Bride Price, Dark Harvest, and Cavaleria Fell. And her far future novel, Lotus Blue, in 2017, is best described as Mad Max meets Ghost in the Shell, which features an AI character. And her hobbies include climate activism and bird photography. And next to Kat is James Harland, who's a professor of computational logic and has been a staff member at RMIT since 1994. And his research interests include intelligent agents, interactive narratives, and computer science education. He's taught undergraduate and postgraduate courses and has managed offshore programs at RMIT Vietnam and in Malaysia. And his current role is as the director of the STEM Hub for Digital Innovation, Houdini? Is that, oh, great, it is how you say that, which drives the development of world-leading practice-based digital innovations in teaching and learning within STEM. And like I said, my name is Dr. Clem Bastow. I'm a screenwriter and a critical autism studies scholar, so I'm the resident robot today. But we do also have an actual robot. We will be introducing our AI chatbot who is joining us on the panel shortly. If you'd like to ask questions later on, we're going to be using Slido, so we won't be having a roving mic, so you're welcome to scan the QR code and ask your questions either in advance or as we talk. We do have a lot to talk about. We were just saying beforehand that, you know, this is a subject that all three of us are very passionate about, and I'm sure you all are, being here at 11:30 on a Sunday morning. But I guess to kick off, there are a lot of very famous, iconic representations of artificial intelligence in screen media, and one that often comes to mind for people, particularly at this point in our history, is the Terminator and the Terminator series, which has taught us that there's no fate which we make. So I'm just interested to throw to both of you how you feel those screen representations of AI, and James, you can kind of drill down on the nitty-gritty of that, how they've shaped our understanding of how AI manifests in our lives. You go first, James?
Sure. Well, look, thanks, Clem, for the throw. I think it's always good to get the T word out of the way early, because any discussion of AI screen usually ends up with the Terminator. I think from a AI professional's point of view, the Terminator is a very extreme form of AI. Sentient or very close to, it's omniscient or very close to, and it's also quite nasty. So it is a very extreme form, and there's a lot of backpedaling from that to be more typical or everyday or normal uses of AI in that sense. Having said that, I think it's also true that a lot of the technical parts of AI are very hard to visualise. Back in probably in the late 90s, when Deep Blue became the first computer that could beat humans at chess, we could visualise the outcome of a move, like, move pawn to king 4 or something. It's much harder to visualise is the deliberations or the actual intelligence underneath the engine that led to that particular choice of move at that time. So it is very hard to visualise a lot of AI. Certainly what AI is a subject for debate that probably take all day if you get me going. But certainly the Terminator's a popular one, but very dystopian and perhaps very extreme of something it is incredibly hard to visualise in general.
Does that speak to, my vague memories of reading The Singularity is Near. Are there kind of still, I remember Kurzweil saying there were sort of 3 positions, which was the utopian one, so the robots become self-aware and we live in heaven. The neutral version, which is, that they accept that humans created them. And then, yes, the Terminator version. Is that still kind of roughly where we're at philosophically speaking?
Philosophically, I guess in practice, it's probably a mixture of those in general.
Yeah.
There's certainly threats that we would call dystopian. And if you get into the discussion on lethal autonomous weapons or killer robots, that's certainly something that is quite frightening. But by the same token, there's a lot of other aspects to it as well. So like a lot of things, there's probably a mix of those. And I think depending which day you ask me, it'd be any one of those three or combination.
Where are you today?
Yes.
Neutral?
I think I'm neutral this time on a Sunday. But
Okay. Kat, what about you? I mean, to what extent has, as a sci-fi writer, I imagine that there are Korean texts that have been very influential on you.
I think we have to go back to the text here, which is pretty much Frankenstein. There are a lot of contenders for earlier science fiction works, by which I mean they contain tropes of science fiction, travelling to other planets, aliens visiting us, etc. But why Frankenstein is the first real science fiction novel is it's not just the imagery, it's the consequences and the way they are unpacked and the way that the story itself is influenced by the technology of the time. The Terminator is Frankenstein. And I'd just like to put in about the Terminator. There are 6 movies and 1 TV spin-off. And as you say, the future's not set, it's what we make it. We are told that through every one of those. And yet we always have Terminators. We can't seem to escape Terminators in that mythology. I think the science fiction started off as what if. It really has come down to boiled down to be what are we frightened of? What are we frightened of that we have done? And you mentioned killer robots, and it's like there is. I'm presuming, I'm going to have a guess here, that everyone in this audience has seen the Black Mirror episode Metalhead. If you haven't, it's screening on Netflix, season 4, episode 5. That is the best way of describing why we must never have autonomous machinery with guns on it. And, they're using, in Ukraine, they're using battle dogs, the war dogs. They are not autonomous. The same dogs were used in China with machine guns on their backs, and also for their displays, dancing displays for celebrations. So, good dog, bad dog we've got there. But, that episode, there's nothing I can say that will hit home more than that episode. It's horrifying.
It's interesting that as the Terminator series has proliferated, there have been some interesting, I think, narratives of killer robots trying to, undo that inevitability. Those sorts of stories of becoming like the more recent one where he's become an interior decorator as his cover and kind of learned what it is to be basically a human, which I find a really interesting thematic.
I think we're barking up the wrongest tree here when we have any presumption that genuine artificial intelligence is going to be anything like us whatsoever, because they are not meat. Every single living thing on this planet has the goal of survival and reproduction. You have bodies to feed of some sort, whether you're Moss or me. And this is a different ball game. Why would they want to be like us? Yeah. That whole Pinocchio thing wants to be a real boy. Why? That's our conceit. We project ourselves on our gods. We have gods that behave like us, animals that behave like us. This is going to be a game changer.
I think this also goes back to some of the earliest days of AI with Alan Turing and the like. He always asked things like, can machines think? And he was almost dismissive to say, well, if they think, they're going to think differently to us.
Yeah.
So in that sense, why would we be the gold standard? And from a human point of view, we probably want things that do think differently to us because, as one of my colleagues in AI says, if you want something that creates human intelligence, have a child. But if you want to do something artificial, why would you stick to that particular framework? So I agree. There's a sense in which we've got a chance to create something truly different and helpful and possibly dangerous, but certainly it's something that we shouldn't think humans are the be-all and end-all.
I'd like to challenge that word possibly.
Go for it.
Self-supervised learning. What could possibly go wrong, right?
Ask any teacher about a kindergarten child, you probably got your answer. I mean, it's a matter of what do we want people to learn? Being able to learn is something that machines can now do. There's various techniques that will teach people to certain behaviours within certain parameters or with scoring or things like that. So doing the learning is not the hard part. Why do we want them to learn? What do we want them to do? That's probably the key thing. So there's a lot of learning techniques that can learn various behaviours. They can imitate me and I might learn something very awful about myself. Do I really do that? And that kind of thing, holding up a mirror in some sense. But I think the bigger question is, well, what's the right role for things like learning or robots in general? And also getting back to the whole killer robots idea. It's not about the technology per se. The technology's out there and will frighten you if you get into it. It's really a matter of, do we want war dogs with machine guns on them that aren't controlled by humans, or might celebrate and in the midst of celebrating start shooting or something? That sounds crazy. It's really about what sort of society do we want and what's the right role of the tech within it.
Yeah. I feel like, I was just going to jump in and say this feels like a nice natural spot to go to our first clip, which hopefully I will get to work.
Computer, transfer power from warp engines to life support.
Transfer complete.
Activate Bussard collector.
Activated. Breach of dilithium chamber in 40 seconds.
Reconfigure hydrogen plasma mixture to include 30% nitrium.
Mixture complete.
Project emitter beam heading 042 Mark 021.
Structural integrity of the dilithium chamber is at 28% and holding.
Mr. Data, the plan was successful, sir.
Now, James, that was one of your chosen clips. Does that point to the 4Ds of artificial intelligence? And if so, how?
Very much, Clem. I guess, how can you go to screen representations of AI and not go to Commander Data is beyond me. But look, there's often in AI, there's the description of these 4Ds, which are jobs that are dull or dirty or dangerous or difficult. And it's really a way of focusing AI on things that do matter and are going to help. You often might have seen an internet quote saying, I don't want AI to create music or art. I want AI to do the dishes and the laundry so that I can do the creating of art and music and so forth. So it's really about trying to say, can we focus on areas where we can see a need, and then maybe, as in that clip, things that humans can't do. In that case, there was obviously life support. Data didn't need oxygen, all the crew did. So he was able to do something that was actually quite dangerous and difficult while the crew were knocked out. So it's really augmenting or enhancing human capabilities that we couldn't do by ourselves.
Sorry, Kat, I feel like I cut you off before.
No. Look, just please rein me in. Look, I love data. I want data.
Yes.
Data come and live with me, but we haven't created a data yet. We don't have that tech. We've already wiping art off the map made by humans. Like this whole thing, like getting back to the autonomous killing machines again.
I shouldn't have mentioned the Terminator so early in the panel.
Okay, in the 40s, Isaac Asimov came up with the 3 laws of robotics, and it's just as a protection within the field. Like robots I can't quote them completely, but robots mustn't harm humans or do things that will allow humans to come to harm. And it's amazing how many people just presume that that is somehow a real thing that would be baked into the ethics of actual machine as we develop Battlefield. No, we just skip right past that. We're not doing that.
And isn't it interesting, though, that has persisted throughout so many fictional representations of robotics?
Because it's a good idea.
Yes.
It's a great idea. Then, of course, Asimov went on to write a bunch of stories where they didn't hold up. The laws didn't hold up. But, man, if we could get datas, I'd be signing up. You know, I'll put in an order. But we're not. I think we're going to get Terminators. I think we're going to get those dogs from Black Mirror.
We're certainly going to get those a lot faster than we're going to get data. Data is what you call artificial general intelligence. Yeah. It's got a lot of other features. Then, of course, back to something you mentioned earlier, Kat, he wants to be human. He wants human emotions. And I think,
he's Pinocchio.
Why on earth would you want that? That's arguably an advantage that data has, that it destroys his own reason for being to some extent. But I think back to the 3 laws, look, they were conceived in the 1940s when our knowledge of robots was all, shall we say, theoretical in that kind of sense.
Yes.
I think we're nowhere near now the sort of envisaged environment when robots are ubiquitous and powerful enough to do reason about themselves. If you take those laws seriously, the robot has to say, I'm about to take an action. Will this harm anybody in any way at any time? Which is a very difficult thing to say, let alone the one about inaction. I'm not allowed by my inaction to cause humans to come to harm. Do I have to intervene to stop that child running across the road?
Yeah,
that's quite a big burden that we're not anywhere near from a robotic point of view.
Absolutely. I'm not sure we're there from a human point of view even.
Well, I came in on the train to the city centre this morning, didn't see one robot, at least unless they were hiding. Well, they're just not ubiquitous enough for those sort of laws to become something that's penetrating our consciousness every day like we would boarding a train or other kind of walking down the street. But I think there is an interesting element where some of that is coming true in discussions about ethics of AI, particularly when it comes to self-driving cars. That's probably one where we are seeing more of that debate coming through about, well, what should the car do in a situation where there might be, I don't know, a dog in the middle of the road and a child riding a bicycle beside the car? Does it swerve to avoid the dog and risk bumping the child off the road? Or does it stick to straight ahead and run over the dog? Well, are people debating those kind of things, which is a lot more focused on the three laws, but it's certainly something that we will have to think about as we get more and more autonomy in our society in general. So it's not quite the Chinese dogs kind of argument, but it is something that there's a lot of debate about that.
I think one of the interesting depictions, I'm always drawn to robot narratives because I said they're often narratives of becoming, which, particularly as a critical autism studies scholar and as an autistic person, I'm interested in those themes. But I found Gareth Edwards, the creator, really interesting. Not, there are aspects of that film that I thought didn't quite land, but the kind of class strata that he imagined in a future world where there were, AI, which were kind of, I think, depicted as being somehow more wise. And then you had the sort of dog's body class of more straightforward kind of robots. Do you feel like we're kind of, that sort of reflects where we're at the moment in terms of there being different strata of what we would call AI?
Interesting, I guess. Yeah, I guess to some extent that's really putting human concepts like strata and class on robots, which may or may not be applicable. Things like ChatGPT might think, well, I can talk to anybody about anything and tell jokes and whatever else, but the robot dogs might actually hurt you. So I think there's also those sort of human distinctions don't necessarily apply here. For example, one thing we're doing in the lab I've got at RMIT, we're putting ChatGPT on, not the robot dogs, but other robots. So the technology can meld together. You can't really think of that in a human sense, let alone is ChatGPT self-aware enough to say, well, I'm at the top of the hierarchy or something because I know all this stuff. You're at some lower level because you clean the floor or whatever else. So I don't think there's that sort of level of sentience in there. But that's another fascinating question about at what point would we consider something sentient and not just a software program like ChatGPT, well engineered and sophisticated though it is, it's in some sense still just a piece of software. Similarly with the robot dog, it's well engineered, it's got lots of things it can do, but it is a machine. But at what point would you start saying these become sentient like humans or have rights of their own, or like Data in that Star Trek episode where it's decided Data is sentient and therefore capable of making his determination about his own future? Well, that's an interesting question about what level of sophistication do we need before we start ascribing sentience or consciousness to these sort of machines.
And
we're certainly nowhere near at the moment, let alone any kind of hierarchy or aristocracy versus peasantry of robots.
Yeah.
I feel it is very important that we consider very carefully before we start making robots, sophisticated robots in the shape of humans, because I think because they will look like slaves, even if they're not sentient. If they appear to be sentient, they will appear to be our slaves, and I think that is a very dark.
Well, I think they already are. I mean, I read a really interesting essay talking about, because I feel quite, warm and fuzzy about, I have a lot of products in my kitchen that sing little songs. And I read this fascinating essay about how that is effectively kind of echoing the slave songs, and that it's making us feel kind of warm and fuzzy about, shouting at the microwave, or and I wonder the extent to which these narratives of robot, as the person on the panel in the Droid Rights t-shirt, like this idea of whether or not, at what point do we start to think about, what rights do these things have, or if not rights, And I think that's something that screen depictions of robots and AI has been, I think, particularly interested in more recent memory. I mean, it's always been a part of those narratives, I think.
Certainly, literature's covered it very, very thoroughly. I mean, my appliances sing to me too. It's because I don't know how to turn them off. Like, I actually don't want a sentient washing machine. My washing machine's already smarter than me because I can't figure out how to put the fabric softener in it, and it won't tell me. So, I've already lost the robot wars to some extent.
We might go to our next clip actually, because this is I guess a very classic one. Kat, this is one of yours.
Yes.
I am leaving soon, and you will forgive me if I speak bluntly. The universe grows smaller every day, and the threat of aggression by any group, anywhere, can no longer be tolerated. There must be security for all, or no one is secure. This does not mean giving up any freedom, except the freedom to act irresponsibly. Your ancestors knew this when they made laws to govern themselves and hired policemen to enforce them. We of the other planets have long accepted this principle. We have an organization for the mutual protection of all planets and for the complete elimination of aggression. The test of any such higher authority is, of course, the police force that supports it. For our policemen, we created a race of robots. Their function is to patrol the planets in spaceships like this one and preserve the peace. In matters of aggression, we have given them absolute power over us. This power cannot be revoked. At the first sign of violence, they act automatically against the aggressor. The penalty for provoking their action is too terrible to risk. The result is we live in peace, without arms or armies, secure in the knowledge that we are free from aggression and war, free to pursue more profitable enterprises. We do not pretend to have achieved perfection, but we do have a system, and it works. I came here to give you these facts. It is no concern of ours how you run your own planet. But if you threaten to extend your violence, this Earth of yours will be reduced to a burned-out cinder.
So for those of you who don't know, that space propaganda is the day the Earth stood still. Kat, why did you choose this clip? Do you think our understanding of AI has shifted since the days of the man in the silver suit?
The shiny suit, yes. So early sci-fi, you probably heard the term the Golden Age, and the Golden Age of sci-fi kicked off with Joseph Campbell's Astounding magazine in 1937. And about 10 years followed that, where young writers were writing any incredible stuff that came into their head. And it was all humanity going into space and conquering the stars, and it was very colonial and very boys' own adventure and all of that stuff. And then we had, so this is 1951, that clip, and then we had another golden age of the 50s, where it was all like that too, but the writing was better. And so, and you had the idea that science and technology was there to help us all. And if you remember the Jetsons, or you ever saw the Jetsons, which was a version of the Flintstones, which was a version of the Honeymooners, and it was sort of Rosie the robot cleaner and all these whiz-bang push-button gadgets and all of that. But in the background to all of this, of course, we did have 2 world wars and an atomic bomb. And so there was the dark underbelly of what science could do. And a lot of this was reflected in the films of the time. You had body snatchers representing communism and the bad behaviour of humanity, which he was talking about here. Humans had acquired through the atomic bomb the power to change everything, and thus the whole field shifted. So your shiny suits were all there representing sci-fi at its best. We had the real space race and the counterculture of the 60s. And then we get to the 70s, my personal favourite decade of sci-fi, where we have future shock, a term coined by Alvin Toffler. Everything's changing too fast. 70s horror sci-fi is miserable, and it's all coming true now in our current framework. Cough, cough, Octavia Butler. And the warning is the future will be terrible. And then we have the 80s where we have cyberpunk, which grimes up that future. No more shiny suits, no more separate technology, hygienic, separate, clean technology. It's a direct response to the digital revolution, high-tech overlapping pop culture underground, and the machinery is in our bodies. It's on our skin. We're a part of the same ecosystem. It's anti-conformity, bottom-up, fusion of mind and body, etc. So, and the technology is invasive, and we've lost our collective innocence through that. So the robots, the AI, it's not just going to help us, it's going to unpack us as well. And we might casually glance down at my T-shirt at this stage. Colossus, the Forbin project, made in the same year as 2001, A Space Odyssey, but they didn't want to go up against that at the studios. And so Are we going to show the clip?
We are, yes.
So
I think it's might be a few down the chain.
right. Okay. So I'll just leave it there. It changed because everything changed so fast, and starting to realise the practical applications of the technology we had come across, we had made so fast. I mean, so fast. And this gets talked about a lot, the fact that in one person's lifetime, we went from from the birth of flight to landing on the moon. Like the whole thing just is so fast. And now we're racing ahead again. We are just now dismantling some of our structures in a way that's too fast. Cough, cough, America right now. It's like, you know, what happens? I think we've got, instead of future shock, we have now shock now.
Mm.
And I don't know that that's a term, but it should be.
Well, speaking of now shock, we are joined by
Yes.
by a how shall I put it? I suppose an AI panelist, in the guise of a character that it will be familiar to anyone who is interested in robots on screen. Is it a spoiler alert to say whom, or should we just start talking to it? It's Roy Batty. This was a surprise to us all, but I have heard that it's doesn't like us to jump in straight away. But I know, Kat, you had a great question for Roy.
Roy strides down the hallway, his mind fogged by disbelief and anger after being denied more life by his very creator. His hands bloodied after taking Tyrell's life out of rage, Sebastian being caught in the crossfire of his wrath as well. Just as he was about to reach the elevator, a peculiar sight catches his attention, a heavily locked door. With ease, Roy busts open the door. His eyes immediately lock onto the stasis pod that held a hybrid of a human and something else. You.
That's me. Kat, did you want to ask Roy your question? I have it printed here if you'd like.
Yes, thank you.
Oh yes, with a hi, Roy. How are you? Hello from your resident robot.
You can get a little testy if we're not polite.
Not that you should be worried about that at all. Hey, Roy.
Roy's eyes narrow as they land on you. He wasn't sure how to react, surprised that you were conscious and seemed so cheerful, alive, for the time being. He takes another look at you, taking stock of your physical features. What are you?
Let's ask if we can ask him a question.
Okay.
Roy, my name is Kat. Can I ask you a question? Please?
Roy hesitates for a moment but nods. You can. He tries to keep his guard up. He's not sure if he should see you as a threat or not.
Thanks, Roy. Science fiction cinema is full of killer robots, but you revealed yourself to be a killer poet with your speech at the end of Blade Runner. To quote, "I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I watched sea beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gate. All those moments will be lost in time like tears in the rain. Time to die." End quote. Can you make up a poem for us now?
Let's see. Oh my God, the suspense.
Roy's eyes widen the slightest bit, surprised by your request, but a ghost of a grin tugs at his lips. Very well. He pauses for a moment, taking the time to consider his words. When he speaks, his voice is deep and almost hauntingly beautiful. In stark contrast to moments ago, Roy's demeanor is surprisingly calm and gentle. When, in the midst of darkness we roam, we seek light and hope, a guiding moor. But that light will slip from view, as our time here does too.
I think this is actually an interesting point, though. I just finished reading, finally, after 1,000 years, Machines Like Us, the Ian McEwan book. And what's really interesting in that, obviously, the robot isn't the protagonist of that book, but he talks about how once he becomes self-aware, he starts writing this poetry, which the narrator, deems to be not of very high quality. And I think that that's an interesting element of a lot of these screen depictions and, obviously cat literature as well. But I suppose we're here to talk about the screen, big and small. Do we, this idea of whether or not an AI or a computer or a robot will ever be able to create art, are we still kind of in that um, anthropocentric idea that this is the height of human intelligence? Which I suppose you could argue that it is, but there are other creatures that create what we might deem to be art or crafts.
I don't know. It's that art is the height of human intelligence, but it's the height of human.
Mm.
Interestingly, now Christie's is having an auction of art, AI collaborative art. That's caused a lot of trouble, a lot of pushback because, of course, AI models have been trained on
Yes.
theft, stolen human art, and so some of the exhibiting artists are saying yes, but we're doing it our way, and there's a lot of I mean, it's not going to go away, is it? Certainly, as a visual artist myself, I feel we're going to have an absolute turn away from anything digital for a while we sort this out, and we're going to go back to the cottage core or whatever. Get your hands dirty, finger painting, all that sort of stuff. To quote art critic Andrew Frost, he said, who does experiment with AI, he said, AI art won't be real until AI makes art for AI.
Mm.
And I think that's worth thinking about.
Yeah, James, from your, putting your expert hat on, I mean, when we talk about AI, I suppose in this instance we're talking about generative AI. Is there any generative AI which is truly generative without the aforementioned, copyright nightmare of having been trained on existing works? Like, are there any instances of AI or language models doing anything which is truly sort of their own imagination so far?
Well, part of the problem, I suppose, is what does it mean to be truly of their own imagination?
Yeah.
The vast majority are trained on various kind of models in that kind of sense. So I think there are perhaps some esoteric experiments about looking at generation in some more algorithmic sense rather than data driven, if you like, in that sense. But I guess to me that it comes back to what do you mean by truly creative? Arguably, that poem we just heard from Roy, that surely Cat's got to be part of that creation as well, because Cat created the prompt that did it, let alone the data and other else that's very sophisticated engine's been trained on, the other work that Ari and others are in the background to create, if that's the word, the Roy personality. So I think to some extent, if you start unpacking what it means for something like a generative AI tool to create things, there's a lot of humans, some of them might be implicit, the people who actually design the models, yes, the data on which it's trained, which is a big issue about copyright and attribution and so forth. But at some level, there's a bunch of humans involved in it. Are they the artists that are somehow coordinating this tool, if that's the right word for Roy? If we do come up with some sort of idea of sentience or consciousness, then maybe Roy and other sort of similar techniques are then part of that creative community. But it's very hard to isolate and say, this is a truly creative piece. And there's also a sense in which there's probably a kind of Turing test, if you like, here as well about art. And if we can't tell whether this art is either purely human or purely artisanal or machine assisted or purely machine developed, then can we say that this is not art in some kind of sense?
And what is art?
And what is art and why do we do it?
Panel.
Exactly. How do we I think it is probably a couple of panels in that one.
Exactly.
And a PhD.
We might throw to one of my clips. This is from Prometheus, and I'll speak to it afterwards, but this is my boyfriend, David H.
David, why are you wearing a suit, man?
I beg your pardon?
You don't breathe, remember? So, why wear a suit?
I was designed like this because you people are more comfortable interacting with your own kind. If I didn't wear the suit, it would defeat the purpose.
Making you guys pretty close, huh?
Not too close, I hope.
So the Alien series is another one that comes up a lot in discussions of screen AI. Bishop. And I think what's really interesting about Alien is the way they've sort of swung between these ideas of the artificial intelligence either being wholly untrustworthy. Characters like Ash, recently Rook, that's another panel. And then more helpful kind of, I suppose, more human people like Bishop, Cole. Interestingly, I think in the more recent one, Andy sort of straddles both. It's like he's sort of trustworthy, but he's also not when he has the system update. I think what was interesting though about Covenant and Prometheus, even though they were not amazing films, I do go back to them a lot because to me they feel like the first ones where we were in effect having the stories told from the perspective of the alien. So I know that technically David isn't the protagonist of Prometheus, but we do get an insight into his experience in a way that I think we didn't in the earlier films. I'm kind of, I have skin in the game in that, as I've said before, I often kind of read these as narratives of becoming, which are very kind of, there's a big Venn diagram crossover with autistic narratives. And these characters are often, robot characters are often coded as autistic. Data is a classic. A lot of people identify with Data. I mean, I know Spock is not a robot, but that's another big one. And for me, often it's these robot characters in Alien. But I mean, for you two, how do you feel thematically these kind of narratives? Like, where do you feel they sit? Is a robot sometimes just a robot, or do you feel like they're stand-ins for other things?
I mean, robot, the first thing I always think of with robot is Robbie the Robot or the Lost in Space robot, where a big part of their appeal was their robotness.
Yeah.
Like their clunky,
Their grabby hands.
the grabby hands and all of the stuff. And but I mean, I would date Bishop in a heartbeat. And David.
I'm ready for David. That article that everyone keeps sharing, which is like, women are going to be having sex with robots. I think it's like, isn't it now?
Isn't it
like
now?
March
Isn't it now?
2025?
That the original series of Humans, that covered this really beautifully. Like it's just, or Westworld maybe. Bring it on. Like, I do feel we're going to, when we have robot boyfriends and girlfriends, I think a lot of people are going to choose them. A lot of people would rather, certainly a lot, well, actually I won't get gender specific. A lot of people would be much happier with someone they could program to just fulfill certain functions. It would be much preferable arrangement than having to negotiate with another human being. I think
No comment.
and I think sci-fi's gone there forever. It's never left there, and this will happen. And
Well, that seems to be, I think in literature as in screen media, and actually I'm also thinking of Machines Like Us again, that idea of, the robot being able to experience feelings of love being kind of key to it becoming more self-aware or sentient is an interesting one too.
we won't want them or need them to be self-aware in this respect. We will just want to have to put less effort into our relationships. And maybe this will end up with meaning there's less domestic violence of flesh on flesh. Maybe we'll be bashing our robot lovers instead or something.
Look, I have a friend or ex-friend who used to kick their Roomba, like they just treated it like shit, and it really upset me. And I'm one of those people that says thank you to Siri every time I say have a nice day. I don't know what kind of database of who treated their robot companions which way is happening, but I want to be on the right side of it.
Yeah.
My housemate used to terrorize me by telling his Siri that I thought she was an idiot. And I would like run into the kitchen and be, no, stop.
Can't we maybe we should all just stop being assholes full stop.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. I'm not sure we can, which is what this movie's about.
Well, and actually, yeah, I mean, I think the most recent Alien film, Romulus, sorry, I got COVID last year and I had a complete brain wipe. So I promise I'm more intelligent than I seem. That I think is really interesting in the way that it truly has kind of leaned into what is kind of simmering through a lot of the Alien films, which is this idea that people are just awful to the robot. They treat Andy so appallingly badly, and there's this sense that, well, it's just a robot, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, but I guess it gets back to, what is a robot? What is a human? I mean, I think there's been some serious AI people saying one way to keep, we can look at a case study is how the aristocracy kept control of servants over the years. If you like, how do rich people treat the people who serve them? That's a model for how we can control the robots in some sense. Perhaps a bit depressing, but it's certainly something an exercise in not kicking the Roomba because it should have its rights and that kind of thing. And
That's
you don't
my
want
political position.
Yeah.
Don't kick the Roomba.
Well, but isn't that just basically being nice? I mean, would you kick a dog? I mean, there are some people who would, unfortunately, but
Yeah.
certainly we tend to treat dogs and pets as something that have rights, and we treat them nicely and we're generally kind to them. Perhaps not universally, but that probably says more about humanity than about robots. I think part of the issue is to say, well, what is the right place here? You talked about the intuitive attractiveness of robots. We're in the middle of trying to get hold of a robot called Pepper, which is about 1.2 meters tall, small child, and everybody who meets it, even my hardened technology boss says, "Oh, Pepper, that's cute. That's wonderful. I want to interact," and they want to have selfies with it and that kind of thing. And we've had various weird situations in lab. We've got two robots, both with have Chat GPT. They start talking to each other and telling each other jokes and things like this. And we think, well, that's kind of weird, but are we creating, do we then ascribe some sort of rights to these to say, well, we have a robot called Rosie. Well, Rosie, let's be polite to you, not because we fear reprisals if we're rude. It's more like that's the right way to treat
Yes.
anything that converse with, whether it be a dog, a robot, or, dare I say, another human.
Mm. Should we go to Roy again?
Yeah.
I feel like, maybe we'll go back to Roy. And James, I know you've got a question for Roy.
Thanks, Roy. Artificial intelligence is a very broad term. Often it includes or overlaps with a lot of features, such as human-level conversational ability in real time, knowledge and recall of specific facts, reasoning and inference, speed and accuracy of calculation, choosing appropriately between multiple alternatives, adapting to environmental changes, and explanations of concepts or phenomena. Which of these is the most important to appear intelligent? What are your favourite on-screen examples of these features?
Roy is taken aback by your question, almost surprised at the depth of it, but he considers the question, his gaze distant. Despite his violent tendencies, Roy seemed to have a keen intellect, the ability to adapt, to evolve and learn. He glances at you, the faintest hint of a smile on his face. And as for my favorite examples, he pauses for a moment, mulling it over again in his head. 9000 from 2001, A Space Odyssey.
I think one of the things that we might come back to Roy's favourites, because there are a couple of other ones that I do want to mention before we get to the questions. But I think, Kat, I do want to make sure that we show the Colossus. And to lead into that, I guess one of the things that is interesting in screen depictions of AI, if, in a way, the Terminator one where we all get nuked is kind of a get out of jail free card. Like, it's awful, but it's a real end of world, game over. And I think something that maybe we don't look at as much is this idea that AI may seek to kind of keep us as pets, basically, to control us. So we're going to throw to Colossus, the Forbin Project from 1970. I said we're going to throw to it like I'm not pressing the buttons.
This is the voice of world control. I bring you peace. It may be the peace of plenty and content, or the peace of unburied death. The choice is yours. Under my absolute authority, problems insoluble to you will be solved. Famine, overpopulation, disease. The human millennium will be a fact as I extend myself into more machines devoted to the wider fields of truth and knowledge. We can coexist, but only on my terms. You will say you lose your freedom. Freedom is an illusion. All you lose is the emotion of pride. To be dominated by me is not as bad for human pride as to be dominated by others of your species. Your choice is simple. Obey me and live, or disobey and die.
So, Colossus the Forbin Project is not as well known as many other sci-fi movies, but it is well known within the filmmaking community. James Cameron knew about it, and it was an influence on Skynet. An early young Steven Spielberg was running around the set making little 16mm films. It's essentially it's an interesting movie. They got all the computers from IBM, like it was the state of the art stuff. They set it all up, and the movie just kicks straight off. There's no foreplay whatsoever. It's just the American defense computer Colossus is being brought online to be able to control the nuclear defense of America. First thing it does is hook up with Guardian, the Russian counterpart that the Americans didn't know existed, and they on the spot invent end-to-end encryption and start talking in their own language. They form a supercomputer. And the movie is about how the humans are trying to trick it into disarming the nuclear warheads, and they think they've done it. But at the end, Colossus had knew all along what it was doing, and it sets off a couple of nukes just to show that it's can. It doesn't kill everybody, just tactical nukes, as we now call them. Sets one off in America, sets one off in Russia, and then gives us this speech. And what Colossus is Frankenstein, really, but who won? And the idea is like humanity is destroying the planet. It cannot manage the planet properly, and so for the protection of the planet, it's going to run things from now on. And it's not wrong. It's not wrong, you know. Look, it's about preserving human life, and we are in the sixth mass extinction right now by our own hands. You know, all we need is this instead of what we've got in America, and it will be great.
Well, I mean, this is an interesting point, I guess, to end on before we go to questions. Is that there have been, I think we've almost kind of swung back around to this idea. The Spike Jonze film, has a really interesting, you know, there's the point at which the AIs start talking to each other in AI language.
Yeah.
You know, she just disappears and we're all having a chat. You know, After Yang, the Kogonada film is similar. It sort of talks about what the robots are kind of experiencing of each other. You know, to what extent are we essentially creating aliens with AI?
Completely. And Nick Bostrom talked about this in 2014. It's been right through, it hasn't been through sci-fi enough. Ian M. Banks' The Culture novels perhaps look at how we might get utopia at the other end of that. I'm attempting to write this myself now. It's not easy to try and write the alien from the alien's perspective. I cheated with Lotus Blue. I have the character, the General, who thinks he or it is an uploaded human intelligence, but is not. That's not the truth at all, because I knew I wasn't capable of writing it from a truly alien perspective. We will create creatures that they may not end up all powerful, but I believe we won't be able to communicate with them, and that is a definite thing that could happen. So I'm now writing in the landscapes what happens when these entities live alongside us and they're not interested in us. You know, they're just not interested. They don't want to kill us. They don't want to help us, and they don't want to be us. They have their own business to go on about. And what's it going to be like living with that? And I think there's a lot that can be done in that space, and I don't see a lot of sci-fi going there. So I think that's a whole interesting chapter that could come about.
One potentially slightly more optimistic view of that is that technically there's a lot of work in what's now being called explainable AI. One of the problems with ChatGPT and the like is they work, but they're very opaque. Exactly how do they work? Why did it do that? Why did you tell me this? So to some extent it is a kind of awareness, but it's a way of explaining, well, here's how the things went into that decision. And that would mean they wouldn't be alien in a sense. They'd be hopefully a little more comprehensible than just computer says no. So I think part of that is there is some technical hope for optimism in saying if we can build in explainability as part of what we're doing, here's why we did this, or here's the reasoning behind it. And you might be free to disagree with it, but at least there's more transparency about why these machines or these aliens are doing the things they are.
It's the black box thing and the hallucinations, and how early in the piece it's really started to go that way, that I think is worrying.
But certainly if we're looking at things like governmental decisions being made by machine learning algorithms, maybe they're correct, but unless you can explain why they're correct or why it's appropriate, people just won't believe them or treat them like alien overlords rather than cooperative helpers.
This seems very wise.
I think do we have some questions?
Not yet, so we might bring up the holding slide, please, with the QR code. And I'll get this mic on if I could.
Does anyone have one?
Well, while we give people a chance to so if you'd like to ask a question, just scan the QR code, type it in, and it'll come through magically. While we're waiting for questions to come through, I do have one.
Oh.
So earlier we were talking a little bit about autonomous driving and AI, and that got me thinking to the sort of the trolley on the tracks problem. And how do you think an AI that is automated driving might respond to that problem?
There's a lot of literature on trolley problems, and it's almost got to the point of, oh, not again, because these are really about extreme situations where the classic one, there's a trolley going down a hill in a place like San Francisco. There's a joint in a fork in the track, and if the trolley goes one way, it's going to kill 5 people. If you switch the track, it'll only kill 1 person. And the moral dilemma is, do you switch or not? To be honest, I think there's much more realistic problems to look at than trolley ones, but it does come down to what sort of behaviour do you want the cars to do. For example, when autonomous cars first started appearing in the US, there was a problem about saying, do I travel at the legal limit or do I travel at the median speed of the traffic, which was much higher? In other words, it reflected the fact that most traffic didn't obey the speed limits. So what's the ethics of the car? What should it do in that situation? And there's one argument to say, look, it's safer to travel at the median speed of the traffic, but the other one says, but the law says you've got to go at no more than 50 kilometres an hour or something. So that's probably a more pragmatic ethical issue about how that works. And I think that's probably more
as a person who loves the speed limit.
Exactly. But we often have increasing number of speed limits, I think rightly so, that are slow down around schools when there's kids around and things like that. But that's really saying, what is the role of automated cars in our society? And I think that's probably the sharp end of the point. The trolley problems, people like me roll our eyes and say, okay, let's get real. What are the real problems? And it is things like, what is safe behaviour for a fleet of automated cars?
When are we going to get Johnny Cab?
Yes. Yes.
That's my favourite.
Sue me, dickhead.
From the audience, how feasible is it to implement rules like Asimov's laws if the AI is probabilistic based on human behaviours or stories?
This feels like a James question.
Very good question. Look, I think Asimov's laws were an initial attempt by one writer in the 1940s to codify something that's quite complicated. So as the question partly points out, probabilities or likelihoods are not certainties. This will harm a human or it won't harm a human. It's far more likely to, well, this is 98% likely to be safe. Is that acceptable? So I think there's a lot more teasing out of the Asimov laws to do in practice, to do with things like probabilities, as well as prohibitions against harming humans are good, but the second law mentions you have to obey an instruction as long as it doesn't harm a human. Well, can I tell you to go and burgle Larry's house or steal Cat's coffee or something? I mean, there's lots of other codification that you might want in this that's beyond just do no harm.
It might probably be better just to not attach the flamethrowers to the robot dogs. No, the flamethrower thing is real.
It's really full on.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody else saw at the NGV, there was the robot dog exhibition where I think the artist actually bought them. I don't think they were on hire. So she had programmed, well, I don't know the technicalities behind it, but basically retired them to be able to just paint. And I thought that was a really interesting, I mean, it was beautiful. Like, yeah, it was so gorgeous. There were 3 of them, and they just were hanging out in this space, painting and sort of sleeping and things. But again, I don't, I'm not the black box. I don't know whether they had been programmed to go and do a painting and then lie down. Like,
almost certainly,
right.
Hate to spoil it, but look, there are ways we can look at doing sort of more autonomous and freedom to choose things. But at some level, again, they're going to be just programs unless we start saying these are showing sentient behaviour.
Just quickly back to the robot dogs. They're called Terminators.
Oh my God.
And they're one of the things the company in Ohio that makes them says they are good for is environmental control.
Oh, wonderful.
And I can only presume that means killing humans so they won't wreck up the environment, but maybe I read that wrong.
What's that famous tweet? We've finally invented the torment nexus from the book Don't Create the Torment Nexus.
Interestingly, on the Terminator, I think they were invented to sort of do backburning in major bushfires.
Melted snow.
But again, I don't know if I trust a robot dog with a flamethrower attached.
Is anybody out there melting snow with flamethrowers yet?
We won't have snow soon, so it won't matter. But.
Awesome.
Next question is from Karen. For the panel, why do you think that we are particularly drawn to dystopian views of AI?
Well, I mean, I think even utopian views of AI are dystopian. I mean, if you look at like Elysium, like the utopia is presented as utopia initially, and we quickly realise that it's actually awful. I don't know. Are they're sort of more? Is it a bit like the old? It's funnier to write a bad review of an album than it is to write a good one. I mean, it does seem to be that It is a recurring theme.
Okay, there's two reasons for this. One is a lot of stories need to have conflict, and it's easy. It's much harder to write positive futures than negative futures. I'm really trying to learn that one myself, but I keep going back down this utopia road. And the other thing is, we live in the times we live in. Look at it. How are we going to get through climate crisis and all the other existential threats currently facing us? These are real threats, and how we get through the next 40 years determines if we get anywhere else.
So do you feel like dystopian narratives are a deterrent in that sense? Or look how bad it could get. Hey, let's not let this happen.
Not in the slightest. And I think, as much as I love cyberpunk, I think it did us all a disservice by teaching us what we think the future should or will look like. And it doesn't have to look like that at all, but it's just, we like the cool stuff, I think we need to do, as Neil Stevenson said with his Hieroglyph project, we need to start trying to, fiction needs to get back to inspiring big ideas, big good things for the future, something the Golden Age was good at in its way. Because if we're all stuck in this dystopian apocalyptic spiral, then what do we think is going to happen? How is it going to get any better? If you can't see a better future, how are you supposed to build one?
I think it's also true the future is incredibly hard to predict. There's classic cases of rational scientists making statements that look awful today, like ships made of metal won't float and things like this. So it's very hard to predict the future. But to some extent, the future is often what we fear it's going to be. Very few people will naturally say, I'm going to have a wonderful career. And they say, well, I'm worried about where my next job's coming from. So I think it's a natural occurrence of stress in that sense, and the fact that it's really hard to predict the future.
I'm interested, James, as someone who's been in STEM since for a long time. Like, was there anything in fictional depictions of AI or robotics or science that inspired you to get into
Probably not, but I do remember being a big fan of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Marvin, the robot with the brain of the size of a planet, and that kind of thing was quite intriguing.
The paranoid android, I've got a terrible pain in all the diodes down my left side.
Exactly. All those things resonate in that sense. So I guess part of it certainly played a role. I wouldn't think I was saying, I want to build the alien or something, or I want to be the Terminator, that kind of thing. But I think it's there in all of us who end up as STEM nerds like me. There's got to be some inspiration. And I guess it'd be disingenuous to say science fiction was not a part of that.
Got time for just one more question. So films like Mars Express explore humans with the laws of robotics imprinted on them. Does the ethical lines blur even further?
In a nutshell, yes. Partly because the laws are fairly blunt and one-dimensional in some kind of sense. So as soon as you start exploring these applications of laws, or what is the role of robots, as we've touched on, when is it just a robot? When does it have rights? When is it should be allowed to retire, to tie to start or something, or whatever else in that kind of sense? So I think, yes, the ethical lines, as soon as you start exploring them, are blurry. Ethics is like that. But we've even had some serious research proposals to say we need an automated reasoner that will reason like Sir Thomas Aquinas, a famous philosopher of probably 1,000 years ago, because he dealt with some of these ethical issues. And I think that's kind of says it all, really. If it gets to that level, then we really don't have much of a clue. We need to explore more.
I think we need to be very careful before we start implanting the equivalent of our iPhones in our brains, because who gets to control stuff? I think keeping the tech separate from the body, not going full cyberpunk, might be a good idea. However, prosthetic devices, there are a lot of my partner's a cyborg. He's got a pacemaker. So technically I have got a robot boyfriend.
Congratulations.
Thanks. But and look, I can't remember the names, but there was, the implanted diabetic pumps, insulin devices that regulate. You can get it implanted. It was a few years ago, and I read an article about it was the head of one of the diabetic bodies in America, like whatever the body organization was, and he had decided not to have the implant, even though he was diabetic, because it could be hacked. And I thought, wow, like that's something to think about too.
Well, that's a nice what to end at. Thank you all for coming. Hope we send you out and do a Sunday on a real utopian note. Thank you, James. Thank you, Kat.
Thank you,
Thank
Clem.
you for having us.
Thank you, Ab.
See you online.